Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. Today we're going to be replacing the pads and rotors on this 2003 Dodge Caravan. This should be the same, if not very similar, to the 2001 to 2006 year model Voyager and the Town & Country, as well as the Caravan. This bolt right here, you're going to use a 21mm socket to remove it, and this is the caliper bracket, or for the caliper bracket. But first, we're going to be removing the caliper slider pins using a 7mm hex. Right here, I am using a 38 drive 7mm hex to remove these slider pins. If you need tools to get this job done, make sure you look for a link in the description below to purchase the tools needed, as well as some parts that I am using in this video. There's some pretty helpful links down there. Removing the slider pins using the 7mm drive hex, it might take a little bit of oomph to get them off, but go ahead and remove them. It's pretty easy. You won't need a breaker bar or anything like that to remove these. If you do, you're probably going to run into some more problems later on, because you're probably going to have something cross-threaded, or somebody might have cross-threaded it on their prior job. Again, if you need any of these tools or parts, look for a link in the description. Make sure you like, share, subscribe while you're watching this video, please. When you put all the parts back together, you're going to be torquing everything to a proper torque specification, which we'll be going over at the end of the video, or when we're putting everything back together. So make sure you take that in consideration and get through this whole video so you know how to properly do it. I need to remove the spring right here on the front of the caliper. Using my right hand, I'm pushing down on the caliper itself into the bracket, which will take some tension off this spring, and I use the pry bar right there to just get it off. It does spring out a little bit, so be careful. Make sure you're using your proper PPE at this time. I have this bungee cord in my hand I'm going to use in just a moment. Got a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to remove the caliper, set it on the back of its shell, kind of like a turtle. Don't take that pad out yet. First, we're going to compress the piston back into the caliper using this caliper compression tool. There are many variations of this tool. They have some pneumatic ones that'll do it for you, or like I have this right here. It's a cheap, easy one. You'll find a link in the description to buy this, and it gets the job done. But first, you need to make sure you open or loosen the cap on the reservoir. So when you're depressing the piston back into the caliper, all that hydraulic fluid has somewhere to go. If that cap is on, it might make a tight seal and blow out a hose somewhere and give you some more problems, create a leak and stuff like that. So make sure the reservoir, brake fluid reservoir cap is loose when you're depressing the piston like this. You shouldn't have to use too much effort to push the piston in. Right here, it's, well, you can't really measure in foot-pounds, but it's not taking much effort. It should go right in. Pistons, especially older ones, or I should say calipers themselves, can go bad. So if you get to a point to where the piston won't go in, or if you have leaks around the piston, fluid around the piston, or if you have like a seized slider pin, just replace the whole thing, but make sure you properly bleed the system. You'll notice later when we're reassembling everything, we don't really need to break or bleed the brake system in this case, since we're not opening a brake line. When you remove these slider pins, make sure you clean them off pretty well. You don't want any debris or dust on these, or do your best to not get any on there. You're going to need a wire brush, or if you have a wire wheel, just clean everything off of your slider pin. If you have anything dried on there, some old grease or lubrication, just get that off before you put it in there. I'm using I'm not sure if it's a lint-free towel or not, but a nice clean towel, maybe some acetone on it to get everything off. This is brake caliper grease. It's meant for this type of lubrication and the heat that it's going to take. You should be able to find a link in the description below to purchase this as well. I'm usually pretty liberal on this, but I make sure I don't get it on any of the threads or onto the brake components itself, such as the pad or the rotor itself. This is just where you're going to have sliding parts. And don't put it on the slider of the caliper housing. Don't use any lubrication there, but we'll go over that a little bit later too. So make sure you stay tuned through this whole thing. Again, like, subscribe, and share. Remove both sliders like I do right here. Again, clean it as best as possible. Lube everything up. The better lube, or the more the lube, the merrier, generally speaking. Again, don't get it on any braking surfaces. Get it all cleaned up and lubed up, ready for reassembly. You could do this after you get everything apart and when you're back in the reassembly process. I just like to make sure this part's done. If I need to go get any parts such as the slider or the rubber boots right there, I could get those parts now. I'm not running into any issues later. I've not been able to get the parts today. So I just make sure all this is freed up and I don't need any extra hardware. Again, make sure you don't have any grease on the threads. That might cause a problem when you're torquing it down later or staying torqued down for the future. Using a bungee cord, I fold it in half and tied a knot in it. I'm going to use it to suspend the caliper off the ground and not hanging from the brake wire, or hose I should say, sorry, not wire. You can see he's just taking the weight of the caliper itself. Not doing anything to put any stress on the brake hose. I've never seen one snap or break from having it dangle right there, but let's not take that chance of being the first one. Now that we have that suspended in the air, we're going to go ahead and remove the brake caliper bracket. This is that 11mm socket. You might need a breaker bar to remove these bolts. You'll see here in the video I do use my half-inch pneumatic gun, so I did kind of cheat to get this video done. This was a surprise brake job for me, but using a 21mm on a half-inch breaker bar usually will get these off. And again, when we reassemble everything, you're going to torque it all down, make sure everything is done properly so you give a proper brake job or do the best BJ that you could possibly do. You can see, like I said, using my gun, I loosen these up. Little cheat sheet. Probably should have edited it out so it makes it look like this job's harder. But really, if you have a half-inch breaker bar, like even a 1.5-foot breaker bar, I could usually even get the half-inch socket or use it to get them loose. But you will find out these are pretty tight. You do have to torque them down to like a little bit over 115 pounds, I think. But we'll go over that again a little bit later. So remove these bolts so you get this bracket. Using the wire brush or a wire wheel, I'm going to remove the dirt and grime or dust that's built up on the caliper bracket the best I can. I used to put lube right here when I would reassemble, but I've had a lot of comments that made me do some research and I don't do that anymore. So I make sure my caliper is nice and clean and set it off to the side for now. Remove your old rotor, set it off to the side, and snag your new rotor. You're ready to put this one on. It doesn't matter how you put the rotor on at this point, and I usually clean my rotor using brake cleaner, which is like an acetone base, to clean off all of the sticky grime that is built up on the rotor from sitting on the shelf or that they put on from production. I use a lug nut that I took off when I removed the tire to hold the rotor in place. Makes assembly much easier. Trust me, do it. You could do it without, but you'll have to hold your rotor in place. To reinstall the brake caliper bracket, grab your 21mm bolts, put them into the bracket as shown right here, and then we're going to properly torque these bolts down. Remember how hard they were to get off? Well, now you're going to figure out why. Using a 1/2-inch socket wrench or a 1/2-inch torque wrench, sorry, I forgot the name of it for a second. We're going to torque these bolts down to 125 foot-pounds. I like to get a good 3 clicks out of it to make sure it's nice and tight. Hopefully you could hear that. But take a listen right here. I'll get 3 clicks to make sure that it's nice and tight. 125 pounds. Here it goes. Now I got my 3 clicks. I know the caliper bracket is nice and tight, and it's not going to be coming off down the road. Nice little perk to doing a proper brake job. Now we have the caliper. We're going to install the inboard pad first. This pad clicks into the piston. Makes it a little bit easier for assembly. While you're here, make sure your slider pins are still moving. Some good even pressure on the brake pad will push it right into the piston. When you grab your outboard brake pad, you'll see it does not load into the caliper like the inboard does. So we're going to put it into the caliper bracket. You can see right there. Sorry, it went out of view a little bit. Now we're going to install the caliper itself over the rotor and into the caliper bracket. You'll have to pull your sliders back. Using the 7mm socket or the 7mm hex on a 3/8 drive socket, going to install the caliper. Get both your slider pins snug tight using your fingers, and then we're going to use a 3/8 drive torque wrench to tighten down both slider pins. Your torque wrench in this case needs to be set to 26 foot-pounds. Again, I like to get 3 clicks out of both of the slider pins, or out of each bolt that I'm tightening using a torque wrench. 3 clicks before I move on and know that this bolt is nice and tight. Now we're going to move on to the spring on the caliper to the caliper bracket. This does get a little fishy, a little hard, but what I have found is that it's a lot easier to push down on the caliper itself while trying to install this spring. After you get it on, it's always nice to make sure you tap on it to just make sure the little clips or ears are in the hole properly. They'll lock into place with a nice little tap. But that's pretty much it. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share while you're watching. Don't forget to properly tighten your lug nuts. If you need any tools or parts shown in this video, make sure you look for a link in the description below to purchase those. If you have any questions, make sure you comment below with the year, make, and model of the vehicle that you're working on, and I will see you on the next hopefully helpful video. Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies.